Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. I want to start by acknowledging that Stanford sits on the ancestral land of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. Consistent with our values of community and inclusion, we have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. My name is Michael Mastrandrea, and I am the Research Director of the Climate and Energy Policy Program at Stanford's Woods Institute for the Environment. The Woods Institute is part of the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability, and for over 20 years has brought together scholars from across Stanford to advance understanding and develop practical, just solutions to pressing environmental problems. The Climate and Energy Policy Program combines interdisciplinary research with direct policy engagement, serving as a practical, timely, and neutral voice informing decision-making on climate and energy law and regulation. Today, we will be discussing beneficial fire in the West. Increasing the pace and scale of beneficial fire is essential to lessening the severity of future wildfires. First, Cassie Jurenci, a wildfire legal fellow with the Climate and Energy Policy Program, will discuss a survey of current state practices and recommendations to increase the pace and scale of planned burns that we have just released. And then after that, a panel of fire experts will discuss key challenges faced by beneficial fire practitioners and ways to break down barriers and expand the use of this critical practice. The panel will be moderated by Michael Wara, who's the director of the Climate and Energy Policy Program. There will be an opportunity for questions from the audience during the panel, so please submit your questions using the Zoom Q&A feature, and we will get to as many of them as possible. Now it's my pleasure to hand it over to Cassie.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Michael said, I'm Cassandra Jurenci. I'm a wildfire legal fellow working with the Climate and Energy Policy Program. I'm delighted to present to you our work on this subject today, which I had the pleasure of working on with researchers and lead authors Miriam Alwan, Abigail Varney, Annabelle Tao, and Matthew Murphy. As wildfires in the United States grow more frequent and severe, these researchers surveyed how several Western states are approaching policy related to prescribed burning on private lands. It is well established that thoughtfully reintroducing beneficial fire to fire-adapted landscapes is a critical component of mitigating future wildfire risk. Yet the challenges that private landowners face in applying prescribed fire to their lands are as complex as the terrains they hope to burn. As states begin developing different approaches to these challenges, understanding which approaches are working well, which are not, and why are important insights to uncover, and we were excited to better understand the lessons of these varied approaches. As a note, our team's work surveys the states highlighted here, and while other states in the West do experience wildfire risk, they were outside the scope of our current survey. We do hope to expand this work in the future. So in this presentation, we will cover 3 challenges private landowners face when trying to apply prescribed fire to their lands, namely exposure to legal liability, the need to obtain the skill, education, and experience necessary to conduct a prescribed fire, and navigating regional smoke management permitting systems. But first, a note on who we're referring to when we talk about private burners. We're talking about private individuals and groups that burn a handful or maybe even a few dozen acres at a time and do so relatively close by to communities. Unlike agency burns, which take place more remotely and can burn thousands of acres at a time. On this slide, we've highlighted 2 notable organizations that do great work to expand burning on private lands, the Good Fire Alliance in California's North Bay and Fire Networks. Each organization is committed to sharing knowledge and skills with their communities to conduct successful burns. The nature of who these practitioners are and which land is being burned make the challenges that private burners face in conducting prescribed fire different than those faced by agencies or municipalities. So turning to the first challenge we covered regarding legal liability, this challenge can be summed up by the statement, no prescribed fire practitioner wants to get sued. Particularly daunting is the threat of being sued for negligence for a prescribed fire that escapes prescription and causes damage. Participants to prescribed burns can suffer damages, of course, but much of the fear surrounding the practice has to do with third-party damages and suppression and investigation costs. You can categorize the damage that an escaped fire might cause to your neighbor's acres of grapevines to be third-party damages, while the cost for CAL FIRE to come and put out that fire would be categorized as suppression costs. Simply put, if an escaped fire gets out of hand and public resources are used to respond to it, a practitioner becomes liable for the costs to do so. Liability for damages are tied to how negligent you might have been in conducting a prescribed fire. For brief context into the world of tort law, one can be found to have acted negligently under various standards, which coincide with different expectations of how a burner should have acted under the circumstances. Of particular relevance to prescribed fire are simple negligence and gross negligence. To find a practitioner negligent under a simple negligence standard, one must only prove that the practitioner failed to show reasonable care under the circumstances. Now, this is a fairly low standard to meet and exposes practitioners to a high level of risk of liability for escaped burns. By contrast, to find a practitioner liable under a gross negligence standard, one must prove that they acted with reckless disregard for the safety of others. This is a higher standard, a more difficult thing to prove, and therefore insulates practitioners against liability more than the simple negligence standard. Generally, a gross negligence standard is appropriate for actions that carry some risk but have considerable social benefits, such as the effect prescribed fire has in catalyzing the return of ecologically sound fire regimes. This is because gross negligence standards incentivize the practice while minimizing the risks of liability. In our work, we highlight California's legal liability framework as we consider it the most progressive approach to addressing this challenge for private burners among the states we surveyed. California has taken two key steps in addressing practitioner concerns relating to exposure to legal liability. First, in 2021, the state established a gross negligence standard for practitioners who meet certain conditions, which insulates them against suppression and investigation costs. And second, to further allay the fears of liability for third-party damages, California passed legislation in 2022 creating the Prescribed Fire Claims Fund, funded at $20 million, which allows for compensation of up to $2 million for individual claims. It's also worth noting that California has a very active network of prescribed burn associations, one being the Good Fire Alliance in California's North Bay that I mentioned earlier. To the extent that concerns regarding liability can be fueled by a lack of experience, equipment, or the personnel necessary for conducting a successful burn, PBAs can contribute those resources and help private landowners feel better equipped to burn and less exposed to risk. Without policy interventions that clearly delineate liability and establish means of recovery for damage, either practitioners must internalize the risk associated with prescribed burning, or third parties who incur damages from a prescribed burn must bear the cost. So, surveying how several states in the West are addressing legal liability, we recommend 4 policy approaches. First, we recommend that states adopt gross negligence statutes for prescribed fire practitioners and consider adopting immunity statutes. We further recommend states gather existing insurance best practices to encourage greater access to private insurance, develop robust public claims funds, and invest in prescribed burn associations. So turning to our survey of states' certified burn manager programs, a growing interest in prescribed burning has shed light on the challenge landowners face in gaining the education, skill, and experience requisite to conducting prescribed burns. This has led to a growing demand for training opportunities for individuals to gain that experience and even certification for prescribed burning. CBM programs are broadly intended to educate practitioners and help them develop the skills required to plan and implement prescribed burns on state and private lands. The benefits and program requirements associated with these programs vary by state, with some states offering greater legal protections to participants, such as greater insulation against liability and even access to claims funds. Eligibility to participate in these programs also varies across states, with different requirements regarding participants' prior fire experience, as well as what coursework must be completed to become certified. We highlight Washington's Certified Burn Manager program in our work, given that it was designed to be accessible to individuals without prior prescribed burning certifications. So, launched in 2022, Washington's program was designed to provide opportunities for private landowners and non-agency individuals to gain skills and training in prescribed burning. The program entails a 3-day course and involves prep work, class instruction, a site visit, and final exam, as well as a requirement that participants draft a burn plan, obtain relevant permits, and finally implement the burn. Participants who complete this training and become a certified burn manager are afforded the protection of being held to the gross negligence liability standard. So our work recommends that states develop certified burn manager programs that offer participants gross negligence liability protection, as well as access to claims funds upon completion of the program. We also recommend formalizing partnerships between agencies, educational institutions, and prescribed fire councils to administer the programs, and for states to identify clear public and private funding pathways for agencies to tap into when creating these programs. And lastly, our work turns to the challenge that navigating smoke management permitting system creates for private burners. Because prescribed fire produces smoke, practitioners are subject to the permitting systems that states have created to comply with the Clean Air Act. Now, states vary in how they issue permits for prescribed fire, but typically a practitioner must first request a burn permit from their local air quality district or natural resources agency based on a detailed burn plan. Then the practitioner must request approval for the burn the day before or the morning of the actual burn. The local air quality agency takes into consideration a number of factors when determining whether to approve the permit, including predicted smoke dispersion, the number of other burns planned for the day, and baseline air quality. However, smoke modeling is an imperfect science, and air quality models are not designed to accurately simulate smaller prescribed fires. So regulators' decision-making in approving smoke permits often requires drawing on knowledge of previous smoke behavior, as well as their personal comfort with prescribed fire. Government permitting processes and even regulators' inexperience with prescribed burning can therefore make it difficult for practitioners to take advantage of opportunities to burn, especially during optimal burning conditions. In one of the states we surveyed, Colorado, practitioners we interviewed generally did not view smoke permitting as a major barrier to the use of prescribed fire. Instead, permitting there is typically short and straightforward, and more complicated permitting requirements are accompanied by detailed guidance. In Colorado, to receive a smoke permit for a prescribed burn that is expected to have little smoke impact, a practitioner must provide the location of the burn, the amount of the type of fuels to be burned, the proximity of the burn to structures and public lands, and the proposed time period of the burn. Burns with larger predicted smoke impact require more information, including a plan for notifying nearby communities about the burn plan. We recommend a few measures to simplify the smoke permitting process in states where it might not be as straightforward. We recommend negotiating with air quality agencies to expand the ability to conduct prescribed fires beyond current local parameters where practicable, and amending regulations and permitting to encourage standardized permitting, record keeping, and local flexibility in granting permits. We also recommend allocating funding and resources to air quality regulators so that they can learn more about prescribed fires through site visits and workshops, and to increase their collaboration with fire practitioners to incorporate observational and modeling inputs in ways that take advantage of marginal burn windows. It's clear that the lessons learned from the different approaches states are taking to expand the practice of prescribed fire will continue to be invaluable. Thank you so much for tuning in, and please check out our recent report. And now I'll turn it back over to you, Michael, to introduce our panelists.
We're going to continue the conversation now with a discussion from with three people that I really think stand out as leaders in this space, and we're really excited to have all of them on the panel today. First, we have Neil Chapman, who is a wildland fire captain with the City of Flagstaff Fire Department, where he leads their efforts on wildland fire management and fuels management, and was also I think maybe the sole or one of the local fire representatives to the recently concluded Federal Wildland Fire Commission. We also have Kyle Lapham, who comes to us from the state of Washington, where he is the Certified Burner Program Manager for the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. In addition, and last but not least, we have Lenya Quinn-Davidson from the UC Ag and Natural Resources Extension Program. Lenya is a fire advisor and also runs the fire network for UCANR. I believe that was at least one of the web pages that Cassie threw up in her presentation. Sorry. So I want to kick the conversation off today by giving each of you an opportunity to share a perspective about where you think we are on a journey toward using fire as a tool on private lands in the jurisdictions where you work. And we obviously we presented a perspective that is in some ways shaped by our own experience in California. but would also be really curious we're trying to get out of our California bubble and engage, because this is really a West-wide problem, and the solutions are both, going to occur at the state and federal level in terms of management of state-owned and federally owned lands, but also as we get toward closer to communities, and the private landowners become incredibly important. And each of you occupies a different niche in the kind of ecosystem of private burning. And so I'd like to start with Kyle and just ask you, Kyle, what's the experience like in Washington? What progress have you made in the last several years as you implemented the burning program, the burner certified burner program, and where do you see challenges still to work on and overcome?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest areas we've seen progress is after launching the certified burner program, we've had interest in the program. But as far as getting more fire done on private lands, I think coupled with the program starting has been prescribed burn associations also starting in the state. And I don't know if that's like because there's a certified burner pathway. But regardless, we've had that growth in the state, and I think the PBAs working solely on private lands and then that network of people are really pushing growth. So working more with people that are issuing permits, working more with the smoke regulators. I think there's a larger voice for burning on private lands. And that's just like one aspect of it. We still have industrial foresters doing a lot of pile burning in the winter. So I think a lot of the nexus could be more groups that are burning on private lands, talking more to each other, and really coming up with more solutions, how we can keep moving it forward, how we can make it safer, how we can reduce our risk when we're doing hopefully more of this burning on the private landscape in our state.
Thanks, Kyle. Neil, would you want to share a perspective about, sort of how you're thinking about local fire integrating into this kind of landscape, the interaction between the built environment and landscape, and how prescribed fire on private land plays a role for you in your work in Flagstaff?
Yeah, we have a very effective federal land fire management system and partnerships around Flagstaff. Getting a lot of acres treated with fire and thinning, but more acres treated with fire. And we have an incredible kind of what we refer to as the donut around Flagstaff of thinning and burning over the years. Google kind of can tell you, I don't even need to give you a paper or anything on it or a map. Google will show you. But our role within a municipal fire department really is a little closer to people's backyards. And while we fully support the landscape and the watershed work that's very important for our community, we really want to make sure that we're doing some of these more complex burns that maybe aren't, going after 5,000 acre blocks, but maybe 50 acre blocks or 150 acre blocks in an HOA or in city open space, or some 5 acre blocks on somebody's private land specifically. And we really need that fire across all of the lands, right up to the fence line. And if we want to have a comprehensive program of reducing that wildfire risk, we can't be ignoring some of these lands because of their designation, whether it's public or private. So we really are using fire, getting into the neighborhoods, and also leveraging those opportunities to help communicate the importance of beneficial fire and how we can get more buy-in from the community, and not make fire something that, only specialized people with lots of gear on and big shiny trucks out in the woods are doing it, but something that we're doing in the neighborhood, in people's backyards, and getting that buy-in from the community that this isn't a threat, it's a tool for us. And so we really leverage that when we do these small localized burns. And we're struggling in Arizona. As you can see in the report, we don't have well-defined liability. We don't have PBAs. We don't have burn manager programs. And it's a bit of a challenge, because I think while we're very proud of our success across our federal and state lands, we can't just rely on that. We need to really plug in these other lands as well.
Thanks, Neil.
Yep.
Lenya, I think, at least from where I sit in California, I think of you as kind of like the and what UCANR has done over the last decade on this issue is kind of, creating a hub of knowledge and learning and resources to help grow the PBA network in California. And could you share like what has been the arc of that experience and how do we keep scaling? Like what are the current barriers to growth? And because ultimately, like this needs as much success as we've had, like what Neil's talking about in Flagstaff and what's the green shoots that are happening in Washington with PBAs, like we need to keep going. And so where have you been, and where do you hope to be back in 5 years in terms of this challenge?
Great question, Michael. Where have I been? It has been a journey in California, and it's a journey that's kind of taken up most of my career. And, I started my work in prescribed fire when I was in graduate school and researching impediments to prescribed fire in Northern California. And that was back in like 2008, 2009. And the conversation at that time was so narrow and so focused on agency fire programs, mostly federal. Even CAL FIRE really wasn't burning at that time. And that whole conversation, when we started the Northern California Prescribed Fire Council, and when we started thinking about, policy and capacity building that could happen, it was really focused on the federal agencies. And we started realizing, pretty recently in 2016, 2017 in California, that a lot of that narrow focus was leaving out the original users of prescribed fire, the communities, the tribes, cultural practitioners, and that we needed to kind of recenter and rethink the impediments that we had identified through a lens of private lands and community-based burning. And that was when things really came into focus in like, what are the next steps that we need to take? What are the policy actions that could enable more of this work? What are the access points? And the prescribed burn associations, when we brought those to California in 2017, it was really about opening a door that had been closed for a long time and granting this access that people didn't even know was possible. And that's what the PBAs have done. It's really, we call it a social movement. It's not just like another program for getting people involved or for educating the communities. It's really a movement to restore that connection of people and place with fire. So that's been pretty transformative, not only here in California, but in our neighboring states where we're seeing this PBA movement grow across Oregon and Washington and other parts of the West. And the policy actions that we were able to pass in California, which Cassie outlined really nicely in her presentation, the changed liability standard, the claims fund, the new agreement options for tribes with the state government, those are all reinforcing this idea of access and that people belong in this work, that everyone belongs in this work in California. So I guess where I see, the next steps in the next 5 years is to continue to sustain that movement and to give people the resources they need to get involved and to feel inspired and feel excited. And some of that is kind of more, community organizing on the level of some of the work that my team does across California. And then some of it's about sustained investment and commitment from the state. And, making sure that things like the California Burn Boss program has funding so we can keep it going, and making sure that PBAs have funds for coordinator positions, and making sure that the claims fund doesn't sunset in 2028 like it's supposed to. So there are all these kinds of, what's our enduring commitment to this work and to the actions that we've passed in the last 5 years?
So all of you have sort of touched in various ways on the social and kind of cultural aspects of this. And I want to try to draw that out a little more. We've had a couple of questions from folks who are, involved in one way or another with local government in the areas near to Stanford, where if you've been here, there's a lot of fuel, there's a lot of risk. And let's just call it what it is. And asking, kind of one question about like, how do we do this? How do we start to build a buffer around a community and how do we start? And also, related to that, which I think relates to these social questions, how do we reassure people that this is safe to do? Like, what is the way that we can help people feel good about seeing a smoke column near their home? I recently was driving with my 14-year-old, and he said, "Look, Dad, there's a wildfire." And I was like, "No, actually, that's Marin County Fire getting out there and putting good fire on the ground. We should be excited." And he knows enough because he has to be bored with me, blah, 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 wildfire all the time to know that. But how do we make that common? Where the first response is one of excitement rather than fear around these questions. What do you do in your day today in that space that finds success? I'm gonna put.
I can
Okay, Lenya,
I
dive
can
in.
chime in.
Yeah.
Again, to this point of like access points for people to understand this work and to understand what goes into it and how it functions. I think the prescribed burn associations and the community-based burning has been really instrumental. For a long time, there was this attitude, I think, in the fire management community of like, we just need to educate the public so that they come around to believing what we believe. And I think there's something really inherently problematic about that. We need to be building this together, right? And the PBAs have brought people in. If someone's scared of prescribed fire, bring them out on a burn, and then they'll immediately get this idea that it's usually burning cooler than we'd like, or that it's not scary, and that there's something very natural about it. People have done this forever. So that's, I think, really been transformative, is that idea that you have these little grassroots community-based groups all over the place who are providing that opportunity for people to gain comfort. And I saw, we have a lot of participants on this webinar today who are PBA coordinators and leaders, and they're just amazing at this. This is their passion, is to bring people out and make them feel safe and make them feel welcome and show them that it's really not as scary as you might think.
Neil,
I was just going to follow up
everybody
on
coming
that.
off mute, so I'm going to let everybody have a chance to talk about this. I think this is a really interesting and important question. So go for it.
I think we're fortunate here in Flagstaff, where the city of Flagstaff hired its first wildland fire management officer in 1997. In around 1996, the Greater Flagstaff Forest Partnership was formed, and probably going back, to the 1970s, Dr. Wally Covington was preaching about healthy forests and the changes that need to happen. So, if you're in a community that doesn't have the social license or the public support or the awareness to do the things that you think need to happen, somebody's got to start building that change. Find those change makers, empower them, and get out in the community. I mean, we do a lot more listening than we do talking when we try to get out in the public spaces and talk about this work. And one of the big things we realized a couple of years ago was just how much the public was desiring more information about smoke impacts. And I won't lie, I was kind of the mindset of, oh, don't worry about the smoke impacts. This work is too important to worry about the smoke impacts. And that was horrible. That was just such a horrible mindset. And now we realize we've committed good resources to helping people get clean air resources, whether it's we give away HEPA filters, we show people how to build their own. We have a much more robust smoke monitoring network, and really that was getting out in our community and understanding their concerns. And so finding those communicators in our space that are able to work not just on the fire line, but in the neighborhood, in the driveway, in people's homes, and get that buy-in, and not just overnight, but I mean, it's taken us almost 30 years to get where we are now in Flagstaff, and really just, committing to that culture and that process over time, I think is what's worked really well for us.
Kyle?
Yeah, I will second a little bit of sort of Lenya's comments about, like, I think education alone isn't necessarily the fix. Bringing people along, we have to show them what prescribed fire is, and get them excited about if they can get involved doing it. And I think traditionally that's been a really hard piece to solve. We still have cultural burners in the state that they can do their practice like they have done. But there's not a lot of organizations that will let you volunteer or show up to observe or get more involved if it's something more than just observing it, so that you have a better sense for how things are actually done, what things actually look like. I I do think we fight a little bit of an uphill battle with a lot of press and things that go along with wildfire, because prescribed fire does look and feel different. So seeing is believing. So I think we really have to bring people along and be able to show them. They have to experience it to really change their mind or their opinion about the practice, because it can be risky. But I think the nice thing is that if we can get people involved and we can provide them with good experience and mentoring, we're taking that riskier part out of it, and we're showing them that there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of careful, meticulous, paranoid people that are trying to make sure we're doing the things the way we're supposed to do, that we're trying to follow the things that have been put in place, and some of that smoke management. I think that's a learning curve we're learning more and more about. So prescribed fire is one of the few proactive ways we can deal with some of the situations we have in our states with either unhealthy forests or catastrophic wildfire. Prescribed fire is the proactive approach. So we might not communicate it as best as we can, that is one of the better solutions. A lot of fuels work is rearranging the fuels. Like, we still need to be burning some of the fuel that's on the ground, so that, one, ecologically, it's a lot better off, but two, also, like, it's removing that fuel, and one of those outputs is smoke. So being proactive with prescribed fire might also mean that we're being proactive with dealing with our smoke and helping people protect themselves, knowing that we are going to be putting smoke near them. So what is it that we can do for them? So I think there's going to be a lot of growth in some of those areas in the future, but I think education alone is not the key. So having these avenues to get people access to experience fire in a positive manner is really cool, and it's important.
I'll just chime in, take moderator's prerogative here, and say one of my fantasies is that when I was a kid growing up in California, I had to make in third grade this little like diorama of a California mission in a shoebox. And I think many California children had to do this who are my age. My dream would be that we can send California kids in third grade as classes out to actually be able to see small burns and experience fire and understand the context and the Native American cultural context in which fire existed in California prior to settlement, rather than teaching them about the missions, teach them about cultural land stewardship, and actually have that be experiential, not just a shoebox diorama in their classroom. And I think it's so important to expose people to this, and to then also expose them to the transformational power of fire on landscapes. Um, so we're getting a lot of questions about workforce, and I'd love to hear all of your perspectives about this. And how do we create, if we're going to have this, scaled up beneficial fire on private lands, we need people to actually conduct the burns. What do you see as the pathways, beyond the certifying of burn managers, but other kind of critical paths that we need to be pursuing to help build the workforce to conduct this work in a safe and professional manner?
I'll jump in quick, and then because I'd probably rather hear what Lenya has to say. But I know one thing I advocate a lot for is comprehensive workforce utilization. We have a large workforce that works in wildland fire that never ever works in prescribed fire. And crosswalking those skills is really important. To be a student of fire, you've got to do both. And taking the methods, the ordering systems, all these things that are not perfect, that have lots of room for improvement, and use those for prescribed burning isn't something that we discuss in the Wildfire Commission. It's something we discuss here locally in Arizona quite a bit. We can mobilize people from all over the country to a field in northern Montana. We don't really do any of that for prescribed fire. So figuring out ways to apply that sense of urgency that we use for wildfire response with prescribed fire is certainly I hate to even call it this, but it's kind of low hanging fruit. It's just all about funding. If it's a wildfire, the Washington office is paying for it on Forest Service land. If it's a prescribed burn, the district ranger is paying for it. So how do we figure out these funding mechanisms? It's even the same thing with the city. We struggle to find the overtime budget to pay our line staff to help us do our own prescribed burns, and we're figuring out innovative ways to fund that. So I think that's a big workforce challenge that would enable us to do more with the existing workforce we already have. Is just apply that same sense of urgency from what we have for wildfire, apply that to prescribed fire.
Yeah,
Lenya, do you have a perspective? Oh, Kyle, go for it.
Yeah, I think that's a tricky question. In the wildland fire sort of sphere, there is the federal National Wildfire Coordination Group is like a set of standards for qualifications. It can be really difficult for people to go and get all of their qualifications because it's going to require them through their task books to have wildfire things accomplished. So if you're focusing on prescribed fire, you're still having to go out and do wildfire things to still get your prescribed fire qualifications. So that's a set of standards that a lot of agencies are using, but in the private realm, some of those tasks can be almost impossible to get because you don't have access to getting those wildfire tasks. So I think part of the momentum for increasing a prescribed fire workforce is being flexible enough to maybe not utilize NWCG qualifications because that is a barrier. We can still get people mentored, trained, and be professional and competent in the practice of prescribed fire without having to go through sort of those steps. Those work. I'm not going to knock those. I've had to do them myself. There's benefit in learning how to, put some fire out for sure. But I think we have to be open-minded enough to look at what are the other pathways and what are the other alternative methods to getting people access to learn how to do prescribed fire, because it's not just sort of that NWCG sort of pathway. There's been some national efforts to try to look at, sort of different task book related pathways, but I don't know that that's been met with as much acceptance as maybe some of us were hoping. So we have the benefit, at least here in Washington, you can still just get your permits and do your burning and you don't need those qualifications. So I think starting a workforce is mentoring people on the private side. Like if you have experience, being able to be open to letting people learn from you. It's, apprenticeship type stuff. It's formalized or not. I think being accepting of there's good people already burning, and we just need to tie in with them and learn what they're doing and share it.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I totally agree with Kyle on, the cautionary tale around NWCG qualifications and thinking that fire professionals are the only way that we're going to get this work done. And I think one of the things we're seeing here in California around workforce is kind of expanding our notion of who gets to do this work and who might have interest in it, even within agencies, even within federal agencies, for example, that have fire programs. They often limit their other natural resource staff or, people who could totally be helpful on a prescribed burn, but have been kind of kept out of that opportunity. And so I think reopening that and bringing natural resource people, bring in wildlife people, bring in the plant, the botanists. These are folks who have a vested interest in what we're doing with prescribed fire. So I think we're seeing that here in California with agencies like California State Parks and other non-fire agencies that have people who are really committed to the ecology of these places and to the culture of these places and want to be involved in prescribed fire because they see that as a connecting point. And so even, the state certified burn boss program is a good state kind of pathway for bringing some of those other people in who, like Kyle said, can get experience with prescribed fire and become certified even if they don't have fire suppression background. And that's critical. And I think that we're going to see that the most successful burn boss programs are the ones that have pathways that are outside of NWCG and outside of wildland fire and fire suppression. But the other piece I wanted to bring up is there's kind of this workforce conversation, but there's also an element that's not workforce that's about stewardship. And that's really where like the community-based fire comes in, where the multi-generational fire comes in, where it's not all, the future I envision is not all people doing this work for pay. It's a lot about people managing their landscapes and managing their communities. And most of our PBA members here in Humboldt County in Northern California, they're not fire professionals. They're not doing this for their job, but they're maybe volunteering on 10 burns a year, and it's on their neighbor's place or, on another community member's place. And it's part of being a local community member. It's part of being a good steward. So I think we have to be careful not to conflate the workforce piece with the stewardship piece. Those are both important. And that's why we want kids out there. We want families burning together. Like, they're not all going to get paid, but the payback is that it's the right thing to do for people and for the landscape. So we just have to remember that.
Yeah, and real quick, last bit, adding to Lenya's comment about the workforce, we are struggling in Arizona to empower workforce because we don't have the policy in place to define the risk and the liability. And so we have, federal dollars that go to our state that we get our hands on for doing hazardous fuel reduction work that should be usable for prescribed fire on somebody's private land. But there's no way that's going to get approved because nobody knows who's liable for that, because if you put money into the game, you could be liable somehow. So I know it's brutal to sit through years of policy work and going through all those meetings, but really that connects to workforce as well. How do we enable people to do this work safely that are not career professional firefighters? We need the policy in place to give them that direction and that safe space to do it.
I want to circle back from next week. First of all, I'll just say, like, there are so many interesting questions coming in the Q&A, and I don't think I've had to moderate a panel like this before, and I'm going to do my best. Just saying to everybody who's asking great questions out there, we really appreciate it. We've had a number of questions that kind of relate back to something that Neil said in his introduction about small and complex burns versus the big 5,000 acre agency burns. And I'm just going to paraphrase a question from Kelly Harayat. She's asking, that just pointing out that many of the most critical places where fuels management activities like prescribed fire can make a big difference for safety and risk reduction are kind of older, non-fire resistant communities, dense housing, where we need to really lean on the landscape more than we can on the built environment, because the built environment is just fundamentally hard to change in some of these places. But those are also the places where it can be hard to get burns done safely because there's risk to the built environment. How do you think about the risk, balancing the risk reduction need with the tolerance or intolerance of risk in these communities? And this relates back to, we've had some questions from folks that live in Los Gatos and Los Altos Hills, communities around Stanford that have a lot of risk and a lot of fuels and are tricky places to work because of that. How do you, and maybe another way to say this is, how do you approach re-entry into places where fire's been excluded for a long time and where it's going to provide a bunch of benefits, but it's challenging. That re-entry is challenging.
Yeah, we have neighborhoods like that in Flagstaff where we're trying to figure it out. And the first thing I'll say is there is no menu or recipe for every neighborhood that's going to be the same. Everything's going to be a little different. And we have some neighborhoods where we're really focusing on working in the built environment and getting those neighbors and those homes kind of up to par before we would ever think about putting fire on the ground on the other side of their fence. Um, but I mean, that's really where we've got to start thinking so much more aggressively about how we treat the built environment. You know, I have millions of dollars in federal and state grants. I have global NGOs in our backyard here doing forestry work. I have nobody coming into somebody's driveway and helping me harden their home, create defensible space. And all of that significantly needs to change for us to be doing this work safely. And so it's challenging. Maybe that another thing that adds complexity, maybe that burn is something we need to be doing at night, because that's going to be the only time that that burn window really opens up against that neighborhood somehow. And then we've got to deal with the smoke from that, because if we're burning that cool, there's probably going to be more smoke that doesn't lift and blow away. So now we've got to deal with smoke mitigation in the homes as well. So it's really challenging in the WUI, and I think that's why we can go jump on a, 4,000 acre a day prescribed burn with our federal partners and crank out some targets and do the watershed work. And that's why we really talk about the complexity of the WUI work, because we have federal land that's up against somebody's backyard as well. It's not just all private land challenges for us, but really figuring out how we can do those complex burns. They can take a significantly longer time to plan and organize. They cost more money because we're going to need to monitor the heck out of those things when we're done. And it's going to take a lot more prep work up front to make sure it happens effectively. But I will say we've done some fairly complex burns with homes across the street, and we've been pretty darn successful with that stuff. And we get great social buy-in, and the public, at first is a little nervous, but then afterwards they're like, oh man, this looks great. And then a year later, when everything's greening up, we get a lot of thanks for it. So it's part of what we need to do. I mean, if we talk about the insurance challenges that you guys are dealing with in California, that's not unique to, you guys. We've got it here in Flagstaff. We like to tell people thinning the WUI around your community isn't going to make that problem go away, because we've done that and that problem didn't go away. So it's got to be a lot more fine scale. We've got to be working at that private parcel level and make those changes there too.
Yeah, some of it's just time. It's like time to talk with the people in the communities. You need a champion to be like, we can do it over here, so that you can show people that it can be done. And then you need some support. So in Washington, we have what's called urban growth areas, and those have more strict smoke regulations on them. But we've recently had an update where we can burn in our urban growth areas now. So we now have it where we can burn on the weekends, where previously you couldn't burn on the weekends. So we've got things going for us to enable us to be able to do more work in and around these communities. But we still have to bring people along with us. We still have to show them that it can be done. And I think once you grow a little momentum about, like, see, we takes a lot of time to do all of your preparations. A lot of these places, if they haven't burned in a long time, you can't actually just put fire on the ground first thing. There's going to be a lot of other maintenance work that might need to be done before you even put fire in there. So that's time. And it's also generally money. Unless you can get, volunteers and people excited about putting in a little sweat equity to do some stuff, that could be fun. The timeline in burning in some of those urban areas just looks longer if it's not been done there before. I have burned next to schools and communities in other states. And you're going to have some people that are not comfortable with it. But the best way to deal with people not knowing about something is to tell them beforehand. So we definitely have to notify people and at least attempt the best we can to tell them what is going on, how we're going to do it, and or we're not burning today and this is why. I think sometimes we fail on when we're not going to pull off a burn, to tell people why we're choosing not to burn that day. But yeah, urban burning sometimes, I'll say, I think sometimes the actual burning is easier. It's all of the other things that make it more difficult. It's the prep work, the notifications, looking for the perfect day for your smoke, but sometimes the burning part itself can be a little bit easier. So we just
Yeah.
we have to do it.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we track what we are doing and be able to tell that story. And I think that people often think that prescribed fire is not even possible near homes or near communities, and that's so not true. And like you said, I mean, in some cases, it's our best tool for that. So I want to give a shout out to Henry Holbrook, who leads the Humboldt County Prescribed Burn Association where I live, because he started tracking that as one of our metrics of success, is how many of our PBA burns are actually within a certain close distance to a home or community. And it's a lot of them. And so we need to be able to tell that story and help people understand that that is possible and it can be really successful. And we need to keep pushing away from just tracking success through acres burned, because what that really does is drive us toward big, low complexity units that might not have much quality. You know, the quality may be lower, but the quantity is higher. And we're seeing that in California, that those types of projects are prioritized over some of the smaller, more complex projects that are really high impact. So yeah, having those different kinds of metrics is really important. And I like what Henry's doing up here in Humboldt.
Couldn't agree more about the value of the acre being critical in this conversation. And we don't do a good job right now of measuring that value. And not all acres are the same, either in terms of the ecological benefit, let alone the risk reduction benefit. I want to pivot a little bit. We have a few minutes, and just ask you all to reflect on smoke. We've got a series of questions in the chat, in the Q&A, about kind of smoke management, Washington's and Arizona's approach to smoke, where you see progress being made, and how to make that progress, right? Like, what are the right approaches to, and Neil, you've already touched on this in your comments, but how do we, if there's, prescribed fire is a choice to have some smoke, as opposed to having it occur in a different context, like a wildfire. But how can we mitigate that? Are there technological solutions there? Is it about creating safe spaces? I just love all of you, and how does that interact with the permitting? Anyone care to share a perspective?
Yes, all of that. I know for us, in our fuel types, our ponderosa pine and PJ woodlands and grasslands, very often that first entry is going to be the smokiest burn, because we've got 100 years of build up there to deal with. So we actually reduce smoke by burning. So we get that first entry done somewhere, and then when we want to go and do some maintenance burns, it's going to be less smoky, as long as we get that maintenance burn on a cycle that's not another 100 years. And so, that's a big message we're trying to tell folks, where it's like a lot of these areas around the community are our initial entries, and it's going to be smoky because we've just got so much stuff to take care of. We get questions as well about, why are you burning today? It's kind of windy. And it's like, well, that wind's going to help reduce or disperse the smoke a lot better. So we need some wind when we're doing our burns to get that out of there. And then also making sure that we're not burning it so cold that we don't lift that smoke out of there. We've got to find those Goldilocks windows and get after it. And so giving homeowners those tools, we've given out over 400 air purifiers to residents here. We keep a stash on call, and I can't tell you the difference it's made when we get somebody calling us with some concerns about smoke. And we kind of start probing them a little bit and asking them some questions. And then we say, hey, are you at home? Are you at work? Can I bring you an air filter right now? And it's just, talk about a level of service we're able to provide. It's not necessarily going to, change the big picture challenges they're having over time, but today we're offering them some help. And so really that's been a game changer for us, is in building clean air spaces. We've got a couple city buildings that we're working on retrofitting to make sure that they have almost hospital level HVAC systems built in, and we're looking at codes. Should our codes involve making sure that every new gas fired home include a 4-inch thick filter instead of a 1-inch thick filter. I mean, we can do that. And so we're going through a code analysis process and looking at some of these cost differences, but setting our homes up for smoke resilience is something we should be considering as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes simple works, like box fan with a filter, giving people access to the tools to proactively prepare themselves if there is going to be smoke. On the other hand, our smoke team in Washington has added staff. We've made available tools and smoke coordination calls that I think are more widely attended when people are burning, and they're looking more at dispersion index. Things that it's sort of like a simple metric. Like when I first showed up, I was like, why are people not paying as much attention, in my opinion, to some of those critical pieces in a weather forecast? Because they're not being provided here, where in other parts of the country, those are really common. So I think sometimes it's sometimes learning the simple things that can help a lot with picking a good day to burn for your smoke or days after. And even some of the experience, like Neil said, those first entry burns. Maybe we're choosing a day where it's like an onion. We're not going to take the whole onion in one burn. We're gonna need a couple burns to work down the fuel loading so that one, it's safer, but that affects how much smoke we're gonna make. So I think smoke can get really complicated, but I think sometimes the simple basic approaches can help us a lot. And if you make that commonplace, it has a big impact.
So we're about out of time, and I want to give you each just a moment to say, what is the one next thing that you think we should do to encourage more use of prescribed fire on private lands where you are, in the state in which you work? I think we'll close with that. What's next for you?
Arizona Prescribed Fire Council. We need one desperately.
Kyle or Lenya? Lenya?
Well, I can go. I mean, I guess, like I said before, to maintain all of the momentum that we've built here in California, and really with a focus on providing those opportunities for entry, those points of entry. So training and capacity building and the PBA movement, and just keeping all of that, keeping these doors open and continuing to open new doors that we might not even know exist.
Thanks.
I'll go with a quote from my friend Colin: "Follow the stoke." So it's keeping up with that good momentum and keeping people excited about what we're doing. But we also passed a claims fund, so I think that will help with some of the worry, some of the insurance, some of those other policy hurdles. I hope that will open some doors, but ultimately I think it's staying excited about where we've already come from and follow the stoke with the progress that we're making.
Well, I want to say thank you to all three of you for taking time, and for the audience for the great conversation and the incredible questions we got in the Q&A. And of course, to Cassie and the authors of the paper for all the hard work that went into trying to build the systematic survey of where we stand at the state level across the West. Thank you all. Have a lovely Friday afternoon and a wonderful weekend when you get there. And I couldn't agree more. Kyle's comment, let's keep the stoke going on this issue. I'm so excited and proud of where California has moved on this, thanks to Lenya's leadership and the leadership of many other people. But we need to make it everywhere, all hands, all lands. And you three are a great part of that process. Thank you for participating today. Have a great afternoon, everybody.